What's up, my friend? Abby here, and welcome back to Writer's Life Wednesday. I know, it should be the other way around because I'm back from hiatus. Woo! But let's not digress. Today we're talking about subplots, what they are, why they matter, and how to include them in your story without annoying your readers and losing their interest. And I'm going to share with you the one quick question that you can ask yourself to determine whether any subplot is good or just a distracting sideshow. Ready to take some notes? Okay, first things first, what are subplots? Subplots can be defined as a secondary story that receives less screen time or story time and less emphasis than the main plot. At their best, subplots are supposed to enhance the main theme and conflict of the story. Doesn't sound too hard, right? Well, it is. Some people would argue that we don't even need subplots. The character that the readers really care about is the protagonist, so why even waste time with other characters in their stories? Because other characters and their stories give your novel more layers of goodness for the reader to pull apart. And they also give the reader other ways to grasp the themes that you're trying to deliver with your story. So basically, subplots can be powerful if they're done right. And that's why today I'm going to show you what I believe are the keys to making subplots just as engaging as the main plot and keeping track of them so that they don't take over your story or worse, just distract from the main event. Okay, so the first rule of subplots, it is not a plot, it is a character. I mean, yes, it's a plot, but let me explain. If you've been watching Writer's Life Wednesday for any amount of time, you know my mantra that I happily scream from the rooftops every chance I get, and that is, story is not about what happens, it's about how what happens affects and transforms the characters. Now this goes for the main conflict of your story as well as the subplot. So instead of starting a subplot and thinking, I want this to happen to this side character, instead start with something like, I want this side character to learn fill in the blank. Like I said before, subplots are usually designed to drive home a point that you're trying to make with your story, and the point can only be delivered through a transformation that's gonna happen off to the side with this side character. So wherever you write down your subplots, try writing them down, outlining them like this. Write the name of the character, then explain, preferably in one sentence, what their role in the story is in relation to the protagonist, what their agenda is, and how they're going to impact the point of the story. Now that's very elaborate, I know, so I'm gonna use an example, and our example today is going to be Pride and Prejudice because I'm obsessed, no shame. We all know that Pride and Prejudice is a story about just that, how two people, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, find true love through a series of challenging events that cause them to realize how prideful and prejudiced they both have been, and transform them into loyal, selfless couple goals. There are a lot of characters in this story, and ergo, a few subplots. One of the biggest subplots in the story is with Lizzie's sister Jane. And if I were to outline the Jane subplot using the method I just mentioned, character, role, agenda, impact, it would look something like this. Jane Bennet, Elizabeth's closest sister and confidant, is on a quest to make a good match and hopefully find true love in the process. She falls in love with the wealthy and charming Mr. Bingley, win-win, and their relationship raises red flags for Bingley's friend Mr. Darcy, who unfeelingly separates the couple and throws a monkey wrench into his own relationship with Elizabeth. Whoa, I know, there's a lot going on in that little description right there, but stay with me. If you want to make your subplots the strongest they can possibly be, there's one question you have to ask yourself. Does my subplot directly engage with or impact the main conflict or main character in my story? Kind of a muddy question, I know. Let me explain. When your subplots stop affecting your protagonist, they start to get dull. Because we care about the protagonist, every time something happens outside their field of vision, we're interested in it, and we're anticipating what's gonna happen when the protagonist finds out about this. Essentially, it's like this. Even if you think you have more than one protagonist in your story, there is always gonna be the one character that is really the main overarching character, because we're gonna filter everything that happens through the perspective of that character. Okay, so as I'm saying this, you're probably thinking about your own book, and you probably know the character that I'm talking about. There's one character that all the readers are gonna filter what happens through their perspective. You only know who that is. Now your job is to make sure your subplot directly engages with or impacts that character. And as your subplot grows and changes and takes a direction of its own, it doesn't have to keep continuously impacting the life of the main character, but bonus points if it does. Because see, our brains are constantly searching for meaning in everything. How is this important? How is this meaningful? Why does this matter? If my protagonist meets a new character and then they part ways and we follow this new character home, our brains are all on high alert, like, what's gonna happen over here with this new character and how is it gonna affect the person we care about, the protagonist? Most writers get this right with the villain's subplot, because we're always making sure what's happening in the villain's world is going to directly impact and engage with what's going to go on in the protagonist's world. But we kind of stop after the villain. It's like the villain is the only one that affects the protagonist. And then we have these subplots with these characters that nobody cares about, that the protagonist doesn't even care about, and we're letting them steal the show. See, the protagonist is the yardstick that we measure everything by. Everything gets its importance from how important it is to the protagonist. And that's why stories with no real protagonist are typically very lackluster. So back to our example, Pride and Prejudice. Let's just walk through the Jane subplot and see if it hits all these points in my character, role, agenda, impact, cry, method. Character. Obviously, our character is the sweet and long-suffering Jane Bennet. Role. She's Lizzie's closest sister, which means whatever happens to Jane, Lizzie will feel on a very personal level. Agenda. Jane doesn't really have much of an agenda. She just wants to marry well to someone she loves, and the stars align for her when she meets a young man of large fortune. Impact. Now, you wouldn't think that this turn of events would have much of an impact on Lizzie's story, but it does. Because Bingley's best friend is Mr. Darcy, and he has a big problem with Bingley and Jane being together. He eventually separates the couple, which is like a slap in Lizzie's face, and that is what leads to a major rift between Darcy and Lizzie. A rift that Darcy has to mend, which causes both him and Lizzie to transform as characters. No, not all subplots have to be this seminal, but bonus points if they are, because there's nothing cooler than being able to point to something that happened offstage at the beginning of the story and be like, that one person doing that one little thing had this huge impact on the rest of the story and everyone in it. So that's the important thing to remember. That's my rule of thumb. If my subplot is not directly engaging with or impacting the main conflict or main character of my story, I need to work on it some more until it does. Use my character, role, agenda, impact, cry method. It really works. What I like to do is just keep a list in my Scrivener project of all my subplots using the cry method, and it helps me to just keep track of my subplots so that I know where they're headed and I can keep them on track so they don't steal the show. So there it is. That's how I organize my subplots and develop them so that I know they're adding to the story, not distracting from it. Comment below and tell me, how do you develop subplots? And what are some of your favorite subplots in fiction? Smash that like button if you like this video, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos every Wednesday and I'd love to have you here in the community. Until next week, my friend, rock on.
I see a sky with a reindeer car, but I'm